welcome. Just a quick introduction. I'm Marcus Ward, the Head of Data and Analytics here at Precise Business Solutions, and I'll be the one presenting to you today. I'll just give you a bit of background on me. I've been working in the data and analytics space now for probably 25 plus years. I've worked at Precise now for coming in on 3 years. My career has been heavily skewed towards delivering outcomes in data warehousing and business intelligence, which I thoroughly enjoy. I've worked in all aspects: development, architecture, team lead, departmental lead, the whole lot. It's been fantastic. But essentially, I operate in this space, and why I do is because I just genuinely believe we live in a world with a lot of data, and it's often pretty noisy with all that data. So curating the right data to make good business decisions is absolutely critical. It's more than just getting that competitive advantage against your fellow businesses to move ahead. It's about just not getting left behind. So that's what I do, and that pretty much leads me to today's topic, which is harnessing the power of Epicor data. Now, I've tried to maintain a balance of functional and tech in this, but it's been a bit challenging. This presentation was not designed to be particularly techy, but just based on its very nature, you keep delving towards that aspect of it. I'm trying to showcase some of the functional capabilities of the APIs, etc., but I also want to give you some nuggets of good code that we can use as well. So it's a bit of a balance, and we'll see how we go. So let's get straight into the topic. Look, Epicor is a rich, I'll call it a treasure trove of quality data, which if you can tap into the back end, because you obviously can utilize and see a lot of it from the front end, if you can tap into that back end data and integrate that into your reporting and visual collateral, you're able to unleash on your business some real next level insight. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how we do that. So moving to the agenda, as per the invite you got, we're going to cover 3 areas. We're going to very quickly have a look at how we traditionally access data in Epicor, and then we're going to move across to probably what is the main area, which is introducing Epicor's REST API. We're going to cover the API interactive help. We're going to look at how we surface that data in a web browser, how we retrieve that API data in a reporting tool, and ultimately how we consume that and surface it up. We're going to showcase that using Power BI. And then finally, we're going to cover some advanced usage, how we build better M code, just some of the nuances that we've picked up as to how we need to do things to make our solutions better. So on that note, let's just rapidly have a look at the traditional methods we have for reporting in Epicor. So Epicor, much like most ERPs, there's a basic report viewer within the system, within Epicor. It's quite good, but it's an old traditional paginated style report that hangs off SSRS. If you know SSRS or SQL Server Reporting Services, or if someone in your organization does, you can build a lot of those yourself. The back end of these reports hangs off the Epicor business objects or the BAQs, which within Epicor you have direct access to. So that's pretty cool. But again, it's just a paginated static report viewer. You've also got something called Chart Tracker, which people make use of. So it's your ability to navigate read-only data and slice it up, and ultimately you send and export some of this data to Excel. Great. It's very ad hoc. It's not, you don't really want it to be the backbone of a regular report you're running because it's very, very manual and repetitive. And then you've got your classic dashboards or your EDD visuals, which is your data discovery. And these are really cool. And with EDD, they've come a long way. But again, they operate within Epicor and they don't hang off anything external, and you can't suck them to anything external dynamically. They also hang off the business objects and the BAQs, which again, you can define and share. So that's the one common thing we do not have with any of these methods, which is the bulk of the ad hoc or reporting visualization methods you will use is that you cannot consume them in an external tool. And it's pretty obvious that if you had access to the BAQs, which you can build yourself, or whether or not you get a consultant to build, you want to be able to consume them in external tools, which a lot of people in your organization will be much more capable of using themselves. And that's where the APIs come in. So introducing the Epicor REST APIs. Epicor comes bundled with the feature-rich REST API. It's useful for numerous things, and you get it whether or not you have a SaaS instance or an on-prem instance. The model looks a bit like this. Actually, the model looks a lot broader than this. This model you see here is constrained to the scope of today's session. The extended model includes access to things like business logic, the security model, and really the REST APIs act as the backbone to all integrations that we would do. Like anything we integrate with Epicor, we're going to use those REST APIs. And they're very, very powerful. But I haven't included those functions on this screen because we could spend a whole session just talking about what they do and what the capabilities are. So really what's key here is we have this web-based API which allows us to query and get data from Epicor, namely the BAQs, brings it across, and we can consume it in our tool of choice, which be it Excel, Power BI, or Click, or any other tool you have in your organization. That's up to you. So let's start with the REST API interactive help. This is and should be your starting point. It's where you should go to test any of the API calls you're going to make and explore even the type of API calls you can do. So we're going to just quickly walk through that. It's very easy. You go to the server where it is installed. It doesn't even need to be that as long as you've got your certificate set up. But essentially the URL is going to be the Kinetic server where you have the Epicor deployed, the instance /apps/REST help. And you can see the URL below, which I'm using, which is our test environment. So let's walk through where this takes us. When you type that URL in, you're going to land on a screen that looks a bit like this. And you can see you've got access to things like services like the business objects, the library, the procedures and the reports, and the functions. There is really a smorgasbord of things that you have access to, but really all we're concerned with today is the business activity query. So we're going to go ahead and select that, and we're going to land on a screen here. Two things to notice. It's asking you for a company and it's asking you for an API version. There are currently two API versions, version 1 and version 2. We're going to use version 1. The main difference is the security level that's applied. Version 1 just has the basic bearer security, so it's username and password, whereas the version 2 introduces a lot more security-rich things for tokenization, etc. Also, at the top, you've got the company, and it defaults to your first company in the list. If you've written a BAQ that is multi-company, the company filter here really doesn't matter. So the BAQs I'm going to be referring to will cover all. So we're going to start typing. I've created a number of data warehouse objects, which I prefix with EDW, which stands for Enterprise Data Warehouse. So I'm going to start typing that in, and you'll see that we will get a drop-down list of some of the objects that are available. For ease, I'm going to go and pick a relatively small one. I'm going to select that one, EDW_DIMGL book, which is a BAQ I've written, which is designed to surface the general ledger books. And when you select that, you are presented with this screen here. Now, it's starting to get maybe a little bit techie and busy, but if we just focus on that really large circle, that's the key thing that you get from this screen is if you want to access that BAQ via a web call, that large circle in the middle gives you the URL which you need to hit. Now the brackets on the end where it says epic01, they are optional. You don't need to include that, and it will actually more broadly not constrain it by the company, but you have that choice. So we're going to go ahead and hit that get execute BAQ button. And it's going to take us to another screen, which again allows you to enter a few parameters. At this stage, it's not really applicable. We're just going to hit try it out and then ultimately execute. And this is where the magic really starts to happen. And key things to note on this screen, again, for those of you who are not techie minded, it can be a bit overwhelming. But there's two things here to pay attention to. First of all is you've got the request URL, which is what you need to type into any tool that's going to access this data. And down the bottom, you've got the response body. Now, what you're seeing there is the actual data that's coming back. Now, it's got two headline nodes. It's got the metadata node and it's got the value node. The value node is just an array of data records. And you can kind of see, if you look closely, that first record, you've got all these different attribute names, which if they were in a table, they would be in the columns. So that's great. We've got data back now, but it feels like it's kind of still within Epicor, and it kind of is, but even though it's not exactly. But let's try that URL in a web browser and see what that gets us. So we're going to take that request URL, we're going to plonk it in just a regular web browser and hit return, and we get data that looks like that. And you can see the similarity. You've got the metadata tag, and then you've got the array of data objects. We're just going to click pretty print up the top just to get it, just to get it to look a little nicer. It becomes a lot more apparent now what we're getting. So we're completely decoupled now from the Epicor user interface in terms of getting that data. Well, when I say Epicor from the front end, so to speak, we obviously still run through that security model, but this is the data we're getting. So we have the data. How do we consume it in an analytics tool? Well, I'm going to show you using Power BI. Okay, so most people have played with Power BI, and just in my experience, most organizations have got a number of people that are quite good at it. So I'm going to assume that you're pretty au fait with what I'm showing you here. So we're going to fire up a report, and we are just going to click Get Data. And you're going to see a dialog like this. It defaults to all, and usually in that list, you don't see the web choice straight away. So we're going to go ahead and select Other, and you'll see web on the right-hand side. We're going to choose that. And we are presented with a dialog box, which is asking for a URL. We quite simply take that URL that was generated for us in the REST API help, and we're going to paste it in there, and we are going to hit OK. And we are presented with this. As you can see, Power BI does all the heavy lifting for you. It's pretty much generated a table for you. And you can see on the left-hand side, you've got something called query 1. You've got a table in the middle, and on the right-hand side, you've got a series of applied steps. Now, ordinarily, we would name that query probably dim GeoBook so that it's applicable and relevant. And those steps go through how we break up the data. So I'm going to quickly walk you through what these steps do, just so you get a very rapid understanding. The first step, which is the source, it's simply making that call to that web document, and it's just the URL within that syntax. Next, we take that, or the source, and it converts it to a table. And of course, because that JSON response only has 2 nodes at the top, metadata and value, that's all you see. It's just 2 columns. So you see text on the left-hand side, but on the right-hand side, it's actually a much deeper hierarchical object. So it just says list. Power BI expands that for you and says, okay, so we've got a number of records here. Let's split that out to each record. And that's why now we've got multiple records, but that value is still, the record is still one JSON object showing all the fields within that record. So it splits it again across the columns, and we see these values here. And now we're getting something that's starting to resemble a table. And then Power BI ultimately finishes it off by just changing some types. Now, it's quite good at this. It decides whether or not it's a date, whether it's text, which is the default, or whether it's an integer or a number or what have you. This is helpful because the data that you get in in Power BI does quite powerful things. Dates in particular, there's a lot of date-based aggregations which occur. If you just send them in as a string, it's not going to be able to utilize those dates. So how you type these up matters. Power BI looks at the data in the column, and it's pretty good if there's data there. But if you've got a date column that's got no dates in it, it just assumes that it's a string. So you sometimes do have to go and override it. Just pop it open, the formula bar. You can see a little bit more of the code of what's going on here. But I tend not to sort of spend too much time in this mode. I tend to go straight into the advanced editor, which shows you now the M query of what's going on behind this call. And it just shows you all the steps in one line. I'm just going to change the display options so that you can see all lines. They wrap the text. And that's all of the M code or the Power Query. which produces the table, which you can now use in Power BI. So we're just going to close that table by hitting close and apply, and that will actually refresh it to the model. And we land on the reporting dashboard canvas. You can see on the right-hand side our table. That again, that would ordinarily be called something nice and neat, but for this purpose, which is just showing functionality, I've left it as that. I'm going to drag a matrix visual onto the dashboard, and I'm going to pop open the query and see all the field names that have been pulled back from our query. Once again, we will change these names and make them, we kill the prefix that says value lock calculator, for example. We don't need to see that. And there's a number of other things we do to make it much more usable. We'll get to that in a sec. But what we're going to do is we're just going to drag a couple of fields, namely the company and name, onto the canvas, and you can see there you go, we've got something that resembles now a pivoted table. We'll drop on the book ID and description, so we're now at the grain of the table, and you can see that you can pop open each of those nodes there, and you've got some meaningful data. Now, I'm not going to go any further here with how this is not a session as to how to build Power BI reports. I'm not really going to go much further here. This is really just to say, well, this is now at the point where you've got a table where you can drop this data on the canvas just the way you would any other table, and it's coming by the API gateway. So from there, let's move on to some advanced usage. Now, there's a raft of best practices that not just myself, but Precise in general and numerous other developers we have that have kind of like put together over years. And the name of the game is essentially to have a well-structured solution that is scalable and efficient. And it's also pretty obvious to anyone that has seen how much BAQs come into play, and if they've had any experience in structured data warehouse or business intelligence design, that you obviously want to embed as much logic as you can in those BAQs. But you can only embed runtime logic in those BAQs, which is great. And that way it can be reusable from any report that hangs off those same BAQs. But you can't embed runtime or aggregation level logic into those. Your reporting tool can do that, and by effective use of your reporting tool like Power BI, it provides the answer where you can actually have your runtime aggregations and business rules embedded into a data model, which you will deploy, and then reports can hang off of that. So in a way, you're reusing that logic at the runtime as well. Now, there's a raft of best practices as well that Precise has taken, that we've accumulated and wrapped into a number of our pre-canned products. So we've got a kind of like a solution stack we call Rapid Financial Reports, which does a lot of the GL reports. And we've taken these best practices all the way from the BAQs to the way we connect and the way we buffer data, and the way we apply the logic and the way we also structure things like the chart of accounts to surface up some really, really good reports. And we've done the same thing with ARM and AP automation, but we'll have a very quick glimpse of those at the end. That's not really the main aim here. What I want to show you here is just a couple of things that we do to make this code a little bit better. So the first thing we've got to do, and those of you that have played with APIs would have already spotted this, and that is when we call the API, we're only going to get back a certain amount of data. And if you are trying to pull back a data set of 3,000 rows, 4,000 rows, and your API is constrained to only allowing you to get 500 records at a time, you need to make multiple calls to that API. So you need to get the first 500 records, then you need to get the second 500 records, and so on until you've got that full data set. And there's a number of other considerations, like if you just want to get data that's changed since last time and merge it into data you already have, or even if you have a small data set that you could pull everything, but it's going slow, the way you buffer the data matters in terms of performance. And you can see here that the function we use called call web feed simply is just takes the endpoint as one of the parameters, and it just essentially uses top and skip, which are the native ways the Epicor API works out what page of data you get. And so we've just built that in as such, and the dim GL book object utilizes it as so. So that very first part, instead of just having that one line calling the web API, we now have this iterative structure where we go through and pull that data. That works really nicely. And that's what we've embedded into all of the template reports that we bundle up and distribute. The next thing as well, which is really key, is when we got to the second stage of naming the columns, this is where you want to make sure your names are meaningful. You don't want the word calculated in front of them. You don't want it preceded with the word value, which is the node at which it came under. So this is where you can rename those. And for the most part, when you design a BAQ, you think about the name you want for the field then. And so you're going to inherit the name, and that's going to stay mostly the same. But a couple of things that I tend to change is I tend to include a couple of extra underscores on the key column. I do that for a couple of reasons. We'll get to a bit later on, but primarily it sorts it to the top, so it's very obvious which one the key column is. And if there's a business key, I tend to have just one underscore on those. So again, those come to the column. You can see on the right-hand side, that's how I managed to keep the GL book key, which is the primary key on the table, and the two business keys straight underneath it. And this is the section, again, once we've broken out structures, it becomes quite obvious what we're doing here, but essentially this is where you want to apply your data types. And again, it's critical if you have a date that you actually do apply that date type. The numbers are a classic as well, because you don't want things coming through as an integer if they're a double-digit decimal. So you want to make sure that you've got true numbers applied to numbers and dates applied to dates. And this is where you do that. It's just one of those things that you do as part of the process. But ultimately, once you do these things with your naming conventions and your date structures, namely the naming conventions, when you get to your visual designer, assuming you don't have auto-linking happening, with auto-linking, if your key columns are named correctly, they will automatically join, but most people tend not to. Within Power BI, if you hover over those links, you will see the key column that is on the facts table and how it joins to the DIMS. If the key column doesn't have the underscore at the top, it's often buried far down the list. So it's not so intuitive what is driving those columns. So this is where it starts to become a pleasure and visually intuitive if you actually name things correctly, as in name the facts and dimension tables correctly and name the columns within them. Okay, and once you go back to the report viewer mode, this is what you see on the right-hand side of the screen with your data. You will see all of your table objects. They'll be called either dim or facts. Quite often your fact tables you'll tend to hide, and you'll just include factual measures, which you'll have in folders like here, other measures or card measures, and you can hierarchy those in as many folders as you need to make them intuitive. The other thing you'll notice here on the right-hand side is within Power BI, probably the best method for creating calculated members, which is what you used to be able to do in the analysis services cubes, is to use what's called a report bridge. So in other words, if you want to come up with, say, a gross profit and then a GP percentage underneath that, which don't necessarily flow from the natural aggregations, they're just like intermittent members that you want to slot in based on whatever reason, you're flipping signs, etc., based on certain business rules. This is how you implement those aggregation-based rules. Again, that can become quite complex, and that's possibly a conversation for another session. But let's now have a look at what some of these reports might look like once you've actually pulled this data in. So this is just a very, very basic lift of one of the reports we had from the Rapid Financial Report Pack. It's got very limited data, but you can see that all we're doing is allowing a drop down at the top from company to be able to slice by company and book, whether or not we want to show decimals. You can select a financial year and you can select a financial period. And we're just looking at the current month, actuals versus budgets, year to date, actuals versus budgets, and then the actual / forecast out to the year as well. And we're slicing that by the hierarchy. Now, this highlights the importance of how you set up your account classifications in your GL. because this will inherit all of that. Now, sometimes you might want to create a hierarchy that rolls things up into gross profit. Other times you might just want to have your net assets as a node. Oh, sorry, you might want to have your assets as a node, your liabilities as a node, and in your reporting, you want to create a calculated member that, say, gives you net assets underneath. So there's a number of ways you can slice this up, and quite often when we move these reports, we'll sit down with the accountants in the business, and our consultant will talk about what you're trying to achieve and how the best way to do that is. We also have produced a number of reports, and whilst technically not Epicor, our AP and ARM, Advanced Requisition Management, do form part of the broader ecosystem within Epicor. And so we've produced some really, really cool reports, again, all reading through the API to pull data out and just showcasing a lot of really cool value to the business, which you don't see straight off the deck within the application itself. Now here, for example, we're just looking on a date range. We're having a look at how touchless some of these transactions are. So we want to know whether or not invoices came through and were created, validated, whether the matching was touchless, whether the approval was touchless, and whether it was end-to-end touchless. And this is a way of gauging how effective, our smart document capture is. Again, this is another one of the reports. We're just trying to understand the statuses of various documents within the system on certain date ranges, the value of the accounts, etc. And finally, look, another one we were looking at, just as by way of example, we were just very keen on having a look at, say, draft invoices, which ones originated from purchase orders as opposed to which ones came through as miscellaneous. Really important because it actually speaks to how proactively and organised you are when you do your ordering, and how much ad hoc there is, but also something comes from PO, there are other benefits downstream. So that's just one way of managing that. So as you can see, there's a huge amount you can do if you can get that data externally. And these are just some of the reports that kind of showcase that. So that pretty much closes off. I don't know if I've gone too long or too short here, but that closes off where we're at this point of the session, and we're at question time. Not sure if I'm looking in the right place. I'm not seeing any questions coming through. Hang on. Yes, I am. Fantastic. Okay, so the first question I can see coming through here, just from anonymous attendee, are the APIs free? Short answer, yes, they are. The Epicor bundled APIs are totally free and can access the business objects, the full raft of integration. When you're dealing with the peripheral products, I think there is some cost implications with some of the objects that you might access in some of the peripheral products, but the core Epicor APIs, yes, they are free. Hang on, I think I've got to... Yes. Bear with me. I'm hoping everyone heard me talk then. It's really freaking me out that I can't hear people coming back. We've got a next question here from Paul Morgan. So Precise sell a Power BI pack of reports? Yes, they do. Yeah, so look, the intent of these reports, we call them rapid financial reports. The intent was to give people a very, very quick fit for purpose way of providing really good reports from day one that operate, without too much setup, because out of the box, Epicor, you get a trial balance in terms of geo reporting, not a great deal from there. The intent was to be able to give you that P&L, your balance sheet, etc., but sliced up, with the right columns, etc., using actuals and budgets, the way management viewers would want to see it. The really cool thing as well, what we've done more recently is we've included with the correct setting up of the account classifications. We've been able to produce a cash flow report as well, which is really cool. So, answer to that is yes. I'm going to type yes in the box here, but I believe you all heard what I just said. Thanks, Paul. Can we have the PowerPoint slides and the Power BI report that you developed for this webinar? Absolutely. So, absolutely, I can share the PowerPoint. In terms of the Power BI reports, I can certainly share a report that connects to some data. I'd have to be very careful because the one I'm using now, or the one that I actually have done my screenshots from in this presentation, are connected to all sorts of different development objects. But if you wanted to just contact me directly on that, and you're looking for just a few pointers or how you want to do something, I'm quite happy to chat with you or share bits of knowledge around how you can do that. So feel free to reach out direct. I'll give that a yes. Okay, we have another one. All right, so I've got a question. Does Precise offer a complete solution pack? So I'm not quite sure what's meant by that. The Rapid Financial Reports pack, it is a complete pack in terms of it produces a key set of management accounts, and we are expanding that to include things like aged debtors and aged creditors. In fact, the latest release includes those anyway. Just slicing by the usual dimensions, which just give you that added vroom, which you don't get out of the box. In terms of complete, if you're referring to, does it include other things like, how you do your invoicing for suppliers, debtors, and credit? There's a number of domains within Epicor, and a lot of them are tailored very, very specifically for business. So for us, if we're selling a pack, we have to balance what's quasi generic for most people, and then we tend to jump in and say, well, how do you want to move from there in terms of what other custom reports do you want? A lot of people with the Power BI skills, for example, can usually take the backbone of what we give them and generate a lot of the other reports that they need. And if they can't, we can jump in and help there. So I hope that's what you were getting at, and I hope I've answered that question for you. All right, I'm seeing no open questions. So last call. If that remains no open, I think we'll call it. Guys, once again, pleasure presenting. It's still freaking me out that I can't hear feedback, but I hope you enjoyed the session. You found it informative. And if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly via email or however, and I'll give you any information I can and help out how I can. Thank you very much.